hopefully very exciting. But I want to kick things off with Efe Ajagba, 15 wins and 0 losses, taking on Frank Sanchez, 18 wins, 0 losses, and 1 no contest. So both of these guys are relatively young, 27 years old for Ajagba, 29 years old for Sanchez, but they've had very different paths. Sanchez is of, Cuban descent. They've got a huge pedigree in boxing from Teofilo Stevenson, who at one point was supposed to have a dream super fight exhibition with Muhammad Ali in the 70s. And obviously everybody from, Guillermo Rigondeaux, Erislandy Lara, Joel Casamayor, and many in decades even previous to these. Cuba is one of those countries that is known, as well as they're known for baseball, they're known for boxing. And they have the Farm, which is the Cuban boxing program, essentially, that cranks out so many talented fighters, some of which never end up defecting and fighting in the United States. So some of the greatest could have been careers actually stayed in Cuba. But Frank Sanchez not only made his way eventually to the States, but now finds himself with one of the best teams in boxing, and that is Canelo Alvarez, Eddie Reynoso, and that squad. But Sanchez, long amateur career, whereas Ajagba from Nigeria, which, can we just say, Nigeria is so on the map now in the combat sports world. I mean, look at what they're doing at the UFC. From Israel Adesanya, who's of Nigerian descent. He's a champion at middleweight, 185. Francis Ngannou just knocked out Stipe Miocic and captured the UFC heavyweight title. Well, technically, Ngannou's from Cameroon, but just look at a map of Africa. Cameroon borders Nigeria. And then you've got the Nigerian-born Kamaru Usman, who's currently the champion at 170. So 170, which is MMA welterweight, 185 middleweight, and heavyweight, all have champs that are either Nigeria or Nigeria adjacent. So Nigeria is certainly making its presence felt in the sports world, combat sports world. So just looking at the promise that Ajagba has been showing, even though he was kind of a latecomer to boxing, he didn't start until he was 17, which is pretty young to get into the game. Not as young as their common opponent, Ajagba and Sanchez's common opponent, which is Brian Howard, who didn't start boxing until he was like 26 years old. Very, very late to get into the game. But because Ajagba has been showing so many physical attributes and such prodigious power, and pair that with the showings of the Nigerians I just mentioned in the UFC, so a lot of people are just looking at Ajagba like, are you about to do some damage in the heavyweight division here? So I had first seen Ajagba on some undercards, and then I saw him fight Kojanu. This was like in 2020, March 7th, which is kind of a boxing day that'll live in infamy because that was the last weekend before they implemented the U.S. shutdowns due to the COVID pandemic. So this was actually on the undercard of Konachki versus Hellenius 1. And Kojanu's kind of a stationary big guy, even bigger than Ajagba, who himself is like 6'6". So Ajagba's like of that super heavyweight variety. Think Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Luis Ortiz. Big heavyweights, 240, 245 plus. Whereas Frank Sanchez, unlike his fellow Cuban Luis Ortiz, Frank Sanchez is actually a smaller heavyweight, closer to 220 pounds. Not to mention Frank Sanchez having a 78-inch reach in comparison to Efe Ajagba's 85-inch reach. Big reach advantage. So here's the thing. When you see Ajagba fighting Kojanu's kind of stationary, but he keeps coming forward. So this ended up being a much more competitive fight than people who would want to be accelerating Ajagba's career would want to see him in. People want to see him like knocking his opponents out. But you also want to develop enough skills to where when you start fighting tougher opponents that you're well equipped and prepared to take these guys on. Because there's only a certain amount of fronting you could do. If you don't have the skills that'll pay the bills, you will get exposed at a certain level. So Kojanu, to me, was like it was a 9th round stoppage. So Ajagba got the finish of Kojanu. It just took him a while, and it took for Kojanu's energy output to reduce until he was more and more vulnerable to those right hands that eventually got him out of there. But Ajagba's next fight against Jonathan Rice, this was supposed to be another showcase for Ajagba against Jonathan Rice, who was actually a latecomer to the sport. He didn't start until I think like 24 or something. But he's a natural athlete. Like he was an ex-football player. So you see the way that he moves, and he has kind of like a jazzy rhythm to his game where he's comfortable enough to kind of drop his lead arm, even though that's dangerous. And it ended up costing Ajagba's next opponent, Brian Howard, who actually got stopped by Frank Sanchez and then by Ajagba in succession. Brian Howard lost back-to-back by knockout. First to Sanchez, where Howard was competitive for a few rounds, then got knocked out, and then fought Ajagba, and that was the one where Ajagba had the viral moment where he just lined him up for the right hand. It's almost like he didn't really jab to the body, but he pawed his left hand out, just laid into Howard with the right hand that Timothy Bradley and Andre Ward were saying sounded like a shotgun blast because of how it hit Howard. And Howard was in the motion of punching, and he ended up just flat on his face with his body and arms twisted. Scary moment, but that was Ajagba's most recent fight. But that fight before the Brian Howard vicious KO was against the jazzy latecomer Jonathan Rice, who actually fought a very competitive decision loss against Ajagba. And this is one of those fights where, because it was supposed to be a showcase for Ajagba, and it ended up being a kind of net neutral type of fight where nobody ever really took control. Like, you had Jonathan Rice, that was, who has a nice right hand himself, that was just looking to land one big bomb, and he would be defensively elusive enough where Ajagba just wasn't able to comfortably just land the jab hand repeatedly, because you got the sense that Jonathan Rice, like if they were to play hot hands, or if they were to slap box, that Jonathan Rice might actually be more rhythmic than Ajagba, who's more, a little bit more robotic in his rhythm. Like, when I see Ajagba fight, I see almost like at this stage of his game, Vladimir Klitschko light. Like, he doesn't have the full arsenal that Klitschko had, nor is he nice enough with his feet. Like, Vladimir Klitschko wasn't as jazzy with the feet as his big brother Vitaly, but he got to be pretty comfortable in his distance control and just controlling like the range, and usually being the bigger fighter at 6'6", being able to jab you to death while lining you up for a deadly right hand. But unlike Ajagba, Vladimir Klitschko had a fully developed left hook, a beautiful left hook. Look at the way he fought Ray Mercer. That was one of the first times, I actually seen Vladimir Klitschko well before the Ray Mercer fight, but that was the one that supplanted in my mind. Damn, Vladimir Klitschko is a problem, because Ray Mercer was a dangerous fighter, and he had fought the best of his generation, some great champions. But Ajagba, because of his posture in the ring and the way that he likes to kind of risk mitigate, doesn't want to get into a fight where both guys are trading combinations and are doing a ton of infighting. He'd rather keep it here. Again, he's 6'6" with an 85-inch reach. He needs to get better equipped with that lead hand, though. I mean, he's able to jab guys who are more stationary, like Kojanu. But against somebody who moves their head and moves around the ring, like Frank Sanchez, his next opponent, he's going to have to do busier work. Think even when Anthony Joshua displayed the improving jab against Andy Ruiz in their rematch. Ajagba has to take his construct. If he's going to be kind of robotic, then it is what it is. That's just the type of fighter he's going to be. But you really need to make use of that reach. Even if you just do the thing where, because you've got the reach advantage, just kind of probe with it. It doesn't always have to be a jab, which sometimes Ajagba's confident in throwing a snappy jab, and other times he's just like trying to find something. Like, and Richard Dwyer, boxing analyst online, pointed this one out, where he just needs to touch you before feeling comfortable enough to throw that right hand. But Ajagba also would be well served in developing a nice, crisp left hook, because that varies what the other guys got to worry about. So then not only can you pop him with a jab and hit him with a vicious or just a nice turn of the wrist type of long range left hook, but now if you could also just probe, in the UFC, if you got like an open hand, the ref will warn you, say close your fingers when you just kind of put it out there. Think like John Jones, think Lennox Lewis would do it sometimes, where the glove, Tyson Fury does it as well. The glove looks half open because you're just kind of putting your hand on his forehead so you can measure him, make sure you're out of range, but you're also blinding the guy. So if you want to throw something hard on top of that, it's available to you. Efe Ajagba will continue to work on these things, I'm sure. As I mentioned, he's with the great camp. But now he's got Frank Sanchez in front of him. And unlike some of these showcasey type fights, Frank Sanchez thinks that he could be the best in the world. He's not here to play the B-side, hey, I'm happy to be here and it was an honor to share the ring with you type. No, Frank Sanchez is with a very confident team. He comes from a very accomplished background. So he's looking at this fight like, hey, I'm the one who's been putting in the 10,000 hours here. Let's see what you got, Efe. But I think that one of the things that sort of levels this out is the size discrepancy. Like the Bridgerweight initiated by the WBC, there's actually a reason for that. It's because certain guys, if you're 215, 220, too big for cruiserweight, but you're not comfortable enough to get in there with somebody 30 to 35 pounds heavier than you are, some of these 250 and up beasts, then they're actually making space where you can still hold the title and hold your head high because you are at least the best of the guys who are 225 and are trying to compete for this lesser heavyweight, Bridgerweight title. But Frank Sanchez, like Deontay Wilder, is like, nah, I'm good. I want to bang with the bigs. So he's got one in front of him in Efe Ajagba. And so if you look at some of Frank Sanchez's fights, like the one against Daweshko, I've had problem pronouncing that one, but this is a dude who's like almost Andy Ruiz size, but even a few inches shorter. Andy Ruiz, by the way, is like 6'3", so he's not short. He's just very, very wide. Well, Daweshko looks more like the rapper Action Bronson. He's just short, squat, but he's got kind of like a slick style. Like, you know what I mean? He's like one of these guys who just has that kind of iconic, confident, I'll just sit back, let you do your thing, and I kind of look cute, roll with your punches, and then try to find opportunities to let my hands go. Because Daweshko's got very short arms. Very different type of fighter than Efe Ajagba. So Frank Sanchez wasn't able to put Daweshko away. Daweshko's durable, and again, he's got sneaky counterpunching abilities, but he was outclassed in this case by Frank Sanchez. But it's almost not even worth getting into that fight as it pertains to Sanchez versus Ajagba because the opponents are so different. So let's talk Brian Howard, that guy who got knocked out in back-to-back fights versus Sanchez and Ajagba. With Howard, he was actually giving Sanchez some early issues just because of how athletic and confident his stance was, where he's a bigger or at least taller guy who's dropping his hands and looking for opportunities to kind of pot shot you with his own right hand or roll with something and come back or throw like a lead hook a la Roy Jones. But it's almost like, don't try this at home. Like when you see people trying to imitate Floyd Mayweather's Philly shell, like Andre Berto when he went against a left-handed Robert Guerrero, don't try this at home if you aren't absolutely comfortable with fighting in this style. Well, Brian Howard had his moments, but Frank Sanchez, with his ring mobility and just the speed of his pocket entry where he starts letting his hands go, Frank Sanchez is pretty confident and commanding, but he does slow down at times. If you could bring him into the middle rounds, then he becomes a little bit more like, I'm moving like this, but I'm not moving my feet as much, which will serve Ajagba very well if he doesn't get blasted out of the pocket. If Sanchez doesn't come in and make his presence absolutely felt where Ajagba gets gun shy, like we recently saw Anthony Joshua against Usyk, where when the guy's just kind of out tit for tatting you and you realize, damn, this guy's able to more or less hit me at will. I'm not seeing all of these punches coming and I'm having trouble finding range and finding his face with my jab. By the way, jabs to the bodies can go a long way in mitigating and solving that problem, but you also have to have the confidence in going low because you run the risk of getting hit over the top if you do jab to the body. But Efe Ajagba, if he could get into the middle rounds, I expect Sanchez to kind of slow down where Ajagba should have a slightly easier time finding the head with the jab, even if he has difficulty early. Ajagba can't get discouraged by not finding him early. And I think that some of these fights that Ajagba went late in are going to be good practice for finding and wearing down the smaller Frank Sanchez over time. And I actually think that that's what's going to happen. Look, I think that the first few rounds in this one are going to be very interesting. There's a chance that Frank Sanchez can score a relatively early stoppage of Ajagba. And there's always, obviously, the possibility that Ajagba can find him with the right hand and make this a short night, which would be devastating to somebody whose hopes are as high as Frank Sanchez in terms of how promising he's been looking early on some of these, Canelo Alvarez undercard fighters. Frank Sanchez is one of these guys who got to America just a few years ago, started trying, wanted to get as busy as possible. Like he fought something like 10 times in 2018 and then 4 times in 2019. And then he fought again in that last weekend before the pandemic hit against the Daweshko on, again, the Konatsky versus Helenius undercard. But then the pandemic hit. So he's one of these guys who found the opportunity like, damn, no, I don't care if there's no crowd. I don't care if I get paid this versus that. I'm hungry. I'm trying to make a statement here. I need to go ahead and make my presence felt and get bigger and bigger fights. So he got busy, very busy during the pandemic. In fact, So Konaczki nor Helenius have fought since March 7th of 2020, whereas Ajagba has fought twice and Sanchez has fought 3 times. So what am I expecting with Ajagba versus Sanchez? Again, I think Sanchez could very well have his moments early. I think Ajagba is going to do enough to make it into round 4 and 5. I think that Sanchez is going to win a couple of the early rounds. I don't know if they'll split in the first 4, but I think there's going to come a time where Ajagba shows mid-round power, where Sanchez starts getting a little tired, gets either caught or near caught, but basically there's a light switch that goes off and says, oh my God, this guy could get me out of here right now, and this guy is hitting hard as hell. Again, there's going to be like a 30-pound weight differential unless Sanchez comes in uncharacteristically heavier than 220, maybe 225. But again, Sanchez is a mover. He moves, he could come in, he could go out, but how long can you stay on that treadmill pace? Sanchez being a bouncer, footwork-wise, versus Ajagba being more of a step and slider is going to do a service to Ajagba, because I think there's more energy preservation in that style, to where I think that his style is going to wear a little bit better. Plus, he's the bigger fighter into the middle rounds. Sanchez is going to stop coming at Ajagba so aggressively and is going to start being a little bit more patient. And I think that, like Vladimir Klitschko in a lot of his fights, I think that there's going to be a steady digest of Ajagba's jab over the slightly reduced in mobility, less head movement over time, less footwork over time, just slowing down Frank Sanchez to where in the middle and late rounds, Ajagba starts taking control and Sanchez doesn't stay confident and aggressive and kind of he doesn't get, I don't think he gets stopped here. I think he kind of concedes to a decision loss where it might even look less than spectacular in the last few rounds, where it's like, damn, Sanchez really didn't go for it in the last few rounds, ended up playing a little bit of a survivalist game. Again, this is just my conjecture, but I see Ajagba taking control and actually winning a decision win over Sanchez. But again, both of these guys could stop one another. I'm just saying that I could see the tempo of the fight playing out to where Sanchez has the early success, starts kind of cooling off in the middle rounds. Ajagba starts saying, hey, yeah, this guy's not going to be able to keep on moving like this. Let me keep on backing this guy down and making him just stay out, keep him in the outside. Don't let him keep on coming up in my chest and in my face to where I have to hold, or this guy could hit me with an uppercut, which, by the way, it would also serve Ajagba to develop a counter uppercut to people trying to jump into the pocket. But that's another story for another day. I don't think it's going to be developed by this fight, but I think that he's going to show enough dangerous punches in the early to middle rounds to where he's going to have Frank Sanchez's respect in the middle to late rounds, Ajagba via decision. Now let's get into Robert Helenius versus Adam Konaczki 2.